They had a saying about the Kethavar sink, the species who built it. No one is sentenced to the sink. The sink is simply where we put what the universe has already finished. It was not a prison, they insisted. It was an honesty. A place to set down the ones the galaxy was done with, and let the place do, gently and inevitably, what the galaxy intended. The sink killed everything they put in it within a week. Every species, every individual, for 400 years without a single exception. It was not cruel, that was the whole philosophy of it. It was just certain. And then they put a human in it. And 8 days later, one day past the week that was supposed to be impossible to survive, the human walked out. The first being in 400 years to leave the Kethavar sink alive. And the species who built it never recovered from what that meant. I know because I was the one who logged him going in, and I was the one on duty when he came out. Let me tell you about the man who beat the unbeatable place, and what it cost, and what it taught a civilization that thought it understood certainty. My name is Oran Vess, and I was a keeper of the Kethavar sink. I'm not human, I'm Kethavar, one of the species who built and maintained the sink, and I believed in it, the way you believe in a thing you've never questioned. So understand that I'm telling you this as one of the people who ran the place that was meant to kill him. That matters. The story is partly about him, and partly about what watching him did to me. Let me explain the sink, because the whole thing turns on understanding exactly what it was, and exactly why escape was supposed to be impossible. The Kethavar were an old, careful, philosophical species. We did not believe in cruelty, and we did not believe in waste, and somewhere in our long history those two beliefs had combined into something the rest of the galaxy found chilling, a philosophy of completion. We believed that some lives, some situations, some beings, reached a point where they were, in a deep sense, finished, where the universe had no further use for them, where continuation was merely suffering prolonged. And we believed it was a kindness, not a cruelty, to recognize that completion and honor it, not to kill exactly. To provide a place where the finished could finish, gently, certainly, without the indignity of struggle. That place was the sink. It was a region, not a building, a region, a stretch of space with a world at its heart that the Kethavar had shaped over centuries into the most perfectly lethal environment in the galaxy. But lethal is the wrong word because it implies violence, and the sink was not violent. The sink was depleting. That was its nature, its genius, its horror. The sink was a place that drained you slowly, completely, inevitably. Everything that entered it began immediately to lose. To lose energy, to lose order, to lose will, to lose self. The environment of the sink was tuned with 400 years of refinement to gently pull apart whatever entered it, to make continuation harder and harder, hope thinner and thinner, the self quieter and quieter, until within a week, always within a week, the entered being simply stopped, ran down, sank. It didn't hurt, they said. It wasn't supposed to hurt. It was just the universe, concentrated and made certain, doing to you in a week what it would otherwise do to everything in time. And it worked. That was the terrible thing. For 400 years, the sink had taken in the finished, the condemned of 100 worlds, the ones their civilizations had given up on, the truly hopeless, and it had completed them, everyone within a week, gently and certainly, exactly as designed. No one fought their way out because the sink didn't give you anything to fight. No one escaped because the sink didn't lock you in. It simply made you unable to want to leave, and then unable to leave, and then unable to be. It was the perfect trap precisely because it wasn't a trap at all. It was an environment that made survival impossible by making the will to survive impossible. You don't escape a place that takes away your reason to escape. That was the Kethavar sink. And into it, 400 years deep into its perfect record, they put a human. His name was Daniel Reyes, and I logged him in, and I want to tell you about that, because the logging is where I first felt something was different, though I didn't understand it yet. I won't dwell on why he was in the sink. The politics of it were ugly and beside the point. A human, caught up in a border dispute with the Kethavar, condemned through a process that was more about making an example than about justice. The Kethavar authorities decided he was finished, that his situation was hopeless, his continuation pointless, and sentenced him to the sink, the way we did with the finished. It was, even by our own philosophy, a borderline case. But the authorities wanted it done, and so it was done, and Daniel Reyes was brought to the sink to be completed. I logged him in. That was my job, to record each entry, note the species and the condition, and begin the watch. And when I logged Daniel Reyes, I noted, as I always did, his condition on entry, his physical state, his mental state, the readings that told us how quickly the sink would take him. And his readings were ordinary. That was the first thing. Most beings, by the time they reached the sink, were already half gone, already depleted by their condemnation, their despair, their journey to this place. They entered the sink already sinking. Daniel Reyes entered it, whole, steady, frightened, yes, anyone would be, but intact, present himself. He looked at the sink, at the place that was going to take a week to end him, and his readings showed not the resignation of the finished, but the alert, churning state of a mind that was very much still working. I noted it as an anomaly and thought nothing more of it. Many beings entered the sink in denial. The sink didn't care. It took the resigned and the defiant exactly the same, because it didn't fight you, it depleted you, and denial depletes as fast as despair, faster sometimes. I expected Daniel Reyes to last the usual week, maybe a little longer given his strong entry condition, and then to sink like all the others. I was wrong about that, and being wrong about it changed my life. The first day he explored. I watched him on the monitors. We watched them all, the keepers, recording the process of completion, though we rarely saw anything but the slow, quiet running down. Daniel Reyes, on his first day in the sink, did something I'd almost never seen. He explored. He moved through the sink, the world at its heart, the depleting environment, and he studied it, methodically, carefully, the way you study a problem you intend to solve. He tested things. He observed. He paid attention to the sink the way a scientist pays attention, or an engineer, or a survivor, cataloging it, learning it, looking for the logic of the place that was meant to end him. It was unusual but not unheard of. Sometimes the strong-willed ones explored at first before the sink took their will. I expected it to pass. I expected the sink to begin its work, to start depleting his energy, thinning his hope, quieting his self, and for the exploration to slow and stop as the running down took hold. That's what always happened. The sink didn't stop you from exploring. It just made you gradually unable to want to, and then unable to. But the sink's work on Daniel Reyes did not take hold the way it should have. I saw it in the readings over the first 2 days. The sink was depleting him, I could see it, the slow drain that it applied to everything, working on him as it worked on all of them. But Daniel Reyes was resisting it, and not the way others had tried to resist it, with defiance or rage or struggle, all of which the sink absorbed and used. He was resisting it in a way I'd never seen, a way that I slowly came to understand was uniquely, bewilderingly human. He was resisting the depletion by replacing what it took. The sink drained his energy. He found new sources of energy, scavenging the environment, working out what in the sink could sustain him. The sink thinned his hope. He manufactured new hope deliberately by setting himself small goals and achieving them, by giving himself reasons to continue that the sink hadn't anticipated. The sink quieted his self. He kept his self loud by talking out loud to himself, narrating, planning, remembering, refusing to go quiet, filling the silence the sink wanted to fill with absence. He was, I realized, treating the sink not as a fate but as a problem. And he was working the problem. The sink depleted, he replenished. The sink quieted, he made noise. The sink took away the will to survive. He generated will deliberately, manually, by act of stubborn human choice, faster than the sink could take it away. For the first time in 400 years, the sink was draining a being who was actively, cleverly, relentlessly refilling himself, and the readings showed something that had never appeared in the sink's records before. A stalemate. I want to convey how impossible this was, by the Kethavar understanding, because the impossibility is the whole point. The sink worked because it attacked the will to survive, the deepest root, the thing under all the surface struggle. Every being that had ever entered the sink had eventually stopped fighting, not because they were overpowered, but because the sink reached down and quieted the very thing that made them want to fight. You can't will your way out of a place that takes away your will. That was the genius. The sink didn't need to be stronger than you. It just needed to make you stop wanting to resist it, and then resistance ended on its own. 400 years, and every will, however strong on entry, had eventually gone quiet under the sink's patient depletion. Daniel Reyes' will would not go quiet. And the reason I came to understand this slowly watching him, and it changed how I understood his whole species, the reason was that human will, it turned out, was not a single thing that could be quieted. It was a renewable thing, a thing humans could generate deliberately from almost nothing by choice again and again. The Kethavar understanding of will was that it was a resource, finite, depletable like energy or order. Drain it and it's gone. But human will wasn't a resource. It was a practice. A thing Daniel Reyes did, actively, moment by moment, manufacturing reasons to continue out of stubbornness and habit and sheer refusal, refilling the well as fast as the sink drained it, because the human relationship to despair was not endure it until it wins but generate hope faster than despair can take it. The sink had been built to defeat will by depleting it, and it had run for 400 years into nothing but wills that could be depleted. And now it had a human, a being whose will wasn't a finite tank to be drained but a renewable practice, a thing he could keep making by choice forever. And the sink, for the first time, had no answer. It depleted him and he refilled. It quieted him and he made noise. It took away his reason to continue, and he simply manufactured a new one, and another, faster than the sink could take them, day after day, in a stalemate that the sink's 400-year perfect design had never once encountered and could not comprehend. By the 4th day, the keepers had noticed. By the 5th, it was the only thing any of us talked about. By the 6th, the authorities had been informed because something was happening in the Kethavar sink that had never happened before that wasn't supposed to be possible. A being was approaching the 1-week mark, the mark past which nothing survived and his readings were stable. Not improving, the sink was too strong for that, it was still draining him, still grinding, but stable, holding. Refilling as fast as he was drained. A human in the unsurvivable place, treating his own survival as a problem to be solved, and solving it hour by hour with a will that would not deplete because he kept on making more. And on the 7th day, the day he was supposed to die, the day the sink completed everything, Daniel Reyes did the thing that broke us. He stopped merely surviving the sink. He started trying to leave it. That was the moment everything changed. And I need to explain why it was so shocking, because it goes to the deepest assumption the sink was built on. The sink had no walls, I told you that. It wasn't a prison, it didn't lock you in. It didn't need to because it took away the will to leave before it took away anything else. No one had ever tried to escape the sink in 400 years because the sink made escape unthinkable. It quieted the part of you that would want to go, long before your body failed. The sink's only lock was the depletion of the will to leave, and that lock had never failed because every will had eventually been depleted. Daniel Reyes' will had not been depleted, and so, on the 7th day, with his will intact because he kept on making it, he did the thing the sink had no defense against because it had never needed one. He decided to leave, and he meant it, and the meaning didn't fade. He'd spent 7 days studying the sink as a problem, and now I understood that he hadn't just been surviving. He'd been mapping. Learning the sink, its logic, its mechanisms, the way its depletion worked and where it was strongest and where, if anywhere, it was weak. 7 days of treating his prison as an engineering problem, while everyone else who'd ever entered had treated it as a fate. And by the seventh day, Daniel Reyes understood the sink, understood it, perhaps, better than we did, because he'd studied it with a desperation and an attention no keeper ever had, and he had found in his understanding a way out. I won't pretend the escape was simple, or that I fully understood every step of it even watching it happen, but the shape of it was this. The sink depleted everything that stayed within it, drained by the tuned environment at its heart. But the depletion had an edge, a boundary, beyond which the sink's power fell away. The sink had never needed to defend that edge, because no one had ever kept the will to reach for it. The will to leave was always gone long before the body could cross the distance, so the edge was undefended, unguarded. The sink's whole security was the certainty that no one would ever want to reach the edge, and Daniel Reyes wanted to still on the seventh day because he'd refused to let the sink take the wanting. And on the eighth day, one day past the impossible week, Daniel Reyes reached the edge of the Kethavar sink, with a will he had manufactured and refilled and defended for 8 days against the most perfectly depleting environment in the galaxy, and he crossed it. He walked out. The first being in 400 years to leave the sink alive, not because he was stronger than it, but because he had refused, with a stubbornness that was the truest thing about his species, to let it take the one thing it needed to take, his will to leave. I was on duty when he crossed the edge. I watched it happen, the readings of a being passing beyond the sink's reach, alive, intact, free. And I want to tell you what I felt, because it's the beginning of the rest of this story. I felt the ground go out from under 400 years of certainty, because the sink wasn't supposed to be beatable. The sink was our philosophy made real, our deep belief that some things are finished, that completion is certain, that the universe has an end state it pulls everything toward, and that the kindest thing is to honor it. And a human had just looked at the most certain completion we'd ever built, and refused it and walked out, and in walking out, he hadn't just escaped a place. He'd disproven a belief. He'd shown that the thing we'd called certain wasn't certain at all. That finished was a thing we decided, not a thing the universe imposed. That a being who refused to be finished could, sometimes, simply not be. And I understood, watching Daniel Reyes walk out of the sink, that nothing about my civilization's understanding of itself was going to survive what he'd just done. Daniel Reyes walked out of the sink, and the Kethavar authorities did the thing that frightened people in power always do when their certainty is threatened. They tried to put him back. I understand it, even though I came to despise it. The sink wasn't just a place to the Kethavar, it was the proof of our deepest philosophy, the visible evidence that completion was real and certain and could be honored. A being escaping the sink wasn't an escape, it was a heresy. It was the universe itself seeming to contradict the thing we'd built our civilization's self-understanding on, and the authorities could not allow it to stand. If Daniel Reyes had beaten the sink, then the sink could be beaten, and if the sink could be beaten, then nothing the Kethavar believed about completion and certainty and the kindness of honoring the finished was true. So they did not celebrate the impossible thing he'd done, or study it, or even simply let him go. They ordered him returned to the sink, re-entered, completed properly this time, the record restored. And this is where I made my choice, the one that cost me my place among my own people, the one I have never regretted. I helped him. It started small, the way these things do. When the order came down to re-enter Daniel Reyes, I was assigned to manage it, to log him back in, to begin the watch again. And I found, standing there with the human in front of me for the first time, that I could not do it. I'd watched him for 8 days. I'd watched him refuse to be finished, watched him manufacture will out of nothing, watched him treat the unbeatable place as a problem and solve it. And I'd felt over those 8 days, my whole understanding of the sink, of completion, of certainty, of my civilization's deepest belief, crack and crumble. Because the sink's philosophy depended on completion being real, on some beings genuinely being finished, on the universe having an end state we merely honored. And Daniel Reyes had disproven it in front of me over 8 days. He hadn't been finished. He'd been decided to be finished by authorities who wanted him out of the way, and then he'd refused the decision, and the universe had let him refuse it because finished was never a fact of the universe at all. It was a judgment we made and called a fact. And now they wanted me to make that judgment again, to put a man who had proven he was not finished back into the place that insisted he was, to complete him properly, to restore the record, to protect the certainty by killing the thing that disproved it. I looked at Daniel Reyes and he looked at me, exhausted, 8 days depleted and somehow still present, still himself, still unfinished, and he said the first words he ever said to me. He said, "You watched, the whole time, I could feel it, someone watching. You saw what I did in there." A pause. "So you know I'm not finished. Whatever your people decided, you watched me prove it. So I'm asking you, Keeper, knowing what you saw, can you really put me back?" And I couldn't. I'd known it before he spoke, but his words made it undeniable. I could not put him back, because I had watched and I knew, and knowing made it impossible. The Sync's whole philosophy required believing that the beings we put in it were truly finished. And I no longer believed it, not about him. And once I stopped believing it about him, I couldn't believe it about any of them. 400 years of the Sync, and I suddenly understood that we'd never been honoring completion at all. We'd been deciding completion and calling it honor, and the decision had been wrong every single time, because finished was never real. It was just the name we gave to the beings we'd given up on. So I didn't log him back in. I helped him escape, really escape, off the Sync world entirely, beyond the reach of the authorities who wanted to restore their record. And in doing it, I crossed a line I could never uncross, became a traitor to my own people and their deepest belief, because I had watched a human refuse to be finished, and I could not, after that, go on finishing anyone. Getting him off the Sync world was the hard part, and it's where I learned the rest of what made Daniel Reyes who he was, not just the stubbornness that beat the Sync, but the thing underneath it. We had to move carefully. The authorities wanted him back, and they were searching, and a keeper helping a condemned human escape was a thing they would punish severely. For days we moved through the edges of the Sync world's infrastructure, me using my keeper's access to get us through, Daniel using the same relentless problem-solving that had beaten the Sync to navigate the dangers I didn't know how to navigate. We made a strange pair. The keeper who'd lost his faith and the human who'd disproven it, working together to get the proof out alive. And in those days, talking to him, I learned the thing about Daniel Reyes that recontextualized everything. I'd assumed, watching him in the Sync, that his refusal to be finished came from some special strength, that he was an extraordinary human, a singular will, the one in a billion who could beat the unbeatable. And he set me straight, and what he said changed how I understood his whole species. "I'm not special," he told me when I said something to that effect. "That's the thing your people got wrong, I think, watching me. You think I beat the Sync because I'm exceptional. I'm not. I'm pretty ordinary where I'm from. Any human would have done roughly what I did. Maybe not as well, maybe better, but the same kind of thing." He paused, working out how to explain it. "Here's the thing about us, Keeper. We come from a world that's always trying to finish us. Earth, it's hard. It's always been hard. Disease, disaster, predators, each other, the plain difficulty of staying alive. Humans have spent our whole existence being told by our own world that we're finished, that this is the end, that there's no way out. And the ones who survived, the ones we're all descended from, were the ones who refused that, who treated 'you're finished' as a problem to solve instead of a fact to accept. That's not a special human. That's just human. It's the baseline. We're all the descendants of the ones who wouldn't be finished, on a world that kept trying to finish them. So when your Sync told me I was finished, when it tried to take my will to continue, it wasn't doing anything my own world hadn't tried to do to my ancestors 1,000,000 times. And I did what humans do, what we're built to do. I refused. I kept making reasons to live faster than it could take them away. Because that's the whole story of my species, Keeper. We're the ones who wouldn't be finished. It's not exceptional, it's just what we are. And I understood then why the Sync had failed. It hadn't met an exceptional individual. It had met a species whose entire evolutionary history was refusing to be finished. A species forged, like the Deathworlders of other tales, on a world so hard that the baseline human was already, ordinarily, the kind of being that treats "you're finished" as a problem rather than a fate. The sink had been built to defeat beings who could be convinced they were finished. And it had run, after 400 years, into the one species that had spent its entire existence being told it was finished by its own world and refusing, every time, until refusing was simply what they were. Daniel Reyes wasn't a singular hero. He was an ordinary member of the species that couldn't be sunk, because being unsinkable was the oldest thing about them. We got him off the sink world, onto a transport out beyond the authorities' immediate reach into the wider galaxy. And that should have been the end. A keeper helps a prisoner escape. The prisoner gets away. A quiet, small victory. But it wasn't the end because of what Daniel Reyes decided to do next, which was the thing that turned his personal escape into something that brought down the sink itself. He decided to tell. "I could just disappear," he said when we were finally clear, when he was finally safe. "Get far away, start over, live a quiet life. And believe me, I want to. 8 days in that place, I want nothing more than to never think about it again." He paused, and I saw the stubbornness settle in him, the same stubbornness that had beaten the sink. "But there are still people in there, other beings, going in right now being told they're finished, sinking, dying every week like they have for 400 years. And they're not finished. None of them. That's what I learned in there. Your people don't put the finished in the sink. They put the given up on in the sink and call them finished because it's easier. And every one of them could refuse it the way I did if they knew it could be refused, if they knew it wasn't certain, if someone showed them that the sink can be beat." He looked at me. "So I'm not going to disappear. I'm going to tell the galaxy what the sink really is, that it's not honoring completion, it's manufacturing it, that the beings inside aren't finished, they're abandoned, and that the whole thing can be beaten because I beat it. I'm going to take away the one thing the sink runs on, Keeper. Not its depletion, its certainty, the belief that it can't be beaten, that completion is real, that the finished are truly finished. I'm going to disprove that publicly with myself as the proof. And once the galaxy knows the sink can be beaten, once every being who enters it knows that escape is possible, the sink's real power is gone. Because the sink only worked because no one knew they could refuse it. I know now, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows." This was the masterstroke, and it took me a while to understand how deep it went. The sink's power had never really been the depletion. The depletion was just the mechanism. The sink's true power was the certainty, the 400-year perfect record, the universal belief that the sink could not be beaten, that completion was inevitable, that the will to leave would always fade. That certainty was what made the sink work. Because a being who knew the sink was inescapable entered it already defeated, already half-finished, their will to leave already weakened by the knowledge that leaving was impossible. The sink's record was its weapon. The hopelessness was self-fulfilling. You couldn't beat the sink in part because everyone knew you couldn't beat the sink. And Daniel Reyes had broken the record. He'd beaten the unbeatable, and now he was going to make sure everyone knew it, which meant that every being who entered the sink after him would enter it knowing escape was possible, knowing the sink could be beaten, carrying, into the depleting dark, the one thing that had been missing for 400 years, the knowledge that the will to leave, if you could just keep it, was enough. Daniel Reyes wasn't going to free the beings in the sink directly. He was going to give them the thing that would let them free themselves, the broken certainty, the proven possibility, the knowledge that finished was a lie and escape was real. And the Kethavar authorities understood the danger, the moment Daniel Reyes began, from beyond their reach, to tell the galaxy what he'd done. Because a sink that everyone knew could be beaten was not a sink at all. The whole apparatus, 400 years, the philosophy of completion, the certainty that held it all together, depended on the record being perfect and the belief being absolute. And a human survivor, loose in the galaxy, telling everyone that the sink could be beaten and showing himself as living proof, was an existential threat to the entire thing. Not because he could break anyone out, because he could give them hope, and hope was the one thing the sink had no defense against, the one thing that, once it spread, would unmake 400 years of perfect, certain completion. The authorities came after him with everything they had, to silence him, to recapture him, to restore the certainty before it shattered. And I, a Kethavar keeper turned traitor, the only one of my kind who'd watched a human disprove our deepest belief and chosen his side, I was the one who had to help him survive long enough to break the sink's certainty for good. It came down in the end to a single confrontation. The authorities cornered us, Daniel and me, as he was preparing the broadcast that would tell the whole galaxy, undeniably with evidence, what the sink really was and that it could be beaten. They cornered us, and they made their offer, and it was the same offer power always makes when its certainty is threatened. Stop, be silent, disappear, and live. Continue and be finished properly this time, you and the traitor keeper both. And Daniel Reyes, who had refused to be finished by the most perfect completion machine in the galaxy, looked at the authorities making their final offer, and prepared to refuse them one more time. The same refusal, the only refusal, the human refusal that was the oldest thing about his species, and the thing that was about to bring down the Kethavar sink forever. The authorities made their offer, and Daniel Reyes refused it, and the way he refused it is the thing I want to tell you about, because it wasn't defiance exactly. It was something quieter and harder to fight. They'd cornered us in a comms relay station on the edge of the sink world space, the place Daniel had chosen to make his broadcast, because it had the reach to tell the whole galaxy at once. And the lead authority, an official named Seven Core, made the offer through the comms, calm and certain in the way of a being who has never lost. Stop the broadcast, surrender, and the human would be spared the sink. Continue, and both of us would be completed properly, the record restored. And Daniel, who had every reason to be exhausted, who had beaten the sink and fled across the galaxy and had nothing left by any reasonable measure, simply kept working. He didn't argue with Seven Core. He didn't make a speech. He just kept preparing the broadcast calmly, the way he'd kept surviving in the sink, methodically, stubbornly, refusing to stop. And when Seven Core demanded a response, Daniel gave one, and it was the truest thing I ever heard him say. "You're offering to not finish me if I stop proving that you can't finish people," Daniel said. "Do you hear how that sounds? You're threatening to complete me, to put me back in the place that's supposed to make completion certain, unless I shut up about the fact that completion isn't certain. But that's the whole thing, Core. If you could actually finish me, you wouldn't need me to be quiet. You just finish me. The fact that you're bargaining, the fact that you're afraid of what I'll say, that's the proof. You know the sink can be beaten. You watched me beat it. And now you're terrified that everyone else will find out, because the moment they know, the sink stops working. So no, I'm not going to be quiet. Because being quiet is the only thing that could possibly save your sink, and your sink doesn't deserve saving. It was never honoring the finished. It was finishing the abandoned and calling it kindness. And I'm going to tell everyone, finish me if you can, but you can't. That's the whole point. You never could. You just got everyone to believe you could, and I'm about to take that belief away." And he sent the broadcast. I helped him send it, used my keeper's access, my knowledge of the systems, to push it out past the authorities' attempts to block it, out to the whole galaxy at once. And what went out was not a speech, not a plea. It was evidence. Daniel Reyes had spent his days of freedom assembling it, the sink's own records which I'd helped him access, 400 years of completions, and against them the record of his own 8 days, the readings, the stalemate, the escape, the proof that the unbeatable place had been beaten. He laid it all out for the galaxy, plain and undeniable. Here is the Kethavar sink. Here is what it claims to be, a place that honors the finished. Here is what it actually is, a place that manufactures completion, that takes the abandoned and drains them and calls it certainty. And here is the proof that it can be beaten, that the will to leave is enough, that finished was always a lie. Here is me, alive, 8 days past the impossible week, the first being in 400 years to walk out. The sink is not certain, it never was, and now you know. The broadcast reached the galaxy, and the galaxy could not unknow it. That was the thing the authorities had feared, and they were right to fear it, because the sink's power had always been its certainty, the perfect record, the universal belief that it could not be beaten. And Daniel Reyes had just shattered that publicly with evidence in front of everyone. The sink could be beaten. A being had done it. The will to leave was enough if you could keep it. Finished was a lie. And once the galaxy knew that, once every being who might ever enter the sink knew that escape was possible, the sink's true weapon was gone forever. You cannot make completion certain to a galaxy that has watched someone refuse it. The sink did not fall all at once. These things never do, but it fell. First, the beings inside it, the ones currently sinking, began to do what Daniel had done, because now they knew it was possible. The broadcast reached even into the sink, carried by keepers like me who'd had their faith broken, and the beings inside learned that the place could be beaten, and that knowledge was the one thing they'd always lacked. Not all of them made it. The sink was still a depleting place, and not every being could manufacture the way a human could, the way Daniel's Deathworld forged species could. But some did. With the certainty broken, with hope where there had been none, with the knowledge that the will to leave was enough, some of them refused and held their will and walked out, the way Daniel had. The sink's perfect record, already broken once, broke again and again, and each break made the next one easier because each break spread the hope a little wider. And then the galaxy turned on the sink itself, because once the truth was out, once everyone understood that the sink wasn't honoring completion but manufacturing it, that the beings inside weren't finished but abandoned, that 400 years of kindness had been 400 years of killing the given up on and calling it certainty, the sink became indefensible. The philosophy that had justified it could not survive the truth. The Kethavar themselves, confronted with what their deepest belief had actually been doing, fractured over it. Many of us, more than the authorities expected, turned against the sink once we understood. And the wider galaxy, horrified, moved against it. The Kethavar sink, 400 years of perfect, certain completion, was emptied and ended and dismantled, because one human had refused to be finished and then refused to be quiet about it. Daniel Reyes survived. The authorities, with the truth out and the galaxy watching, could not complete him without proving his point, could not finish the man whose whole message was that they finished the abandoned. He'd made himself unfinishable in the most literal way. Killing him would have confirmed everything he'd said. So they let him go. The man who beat the sink walked free and lived, and the sink that was meant to kill him in a week did not outlast him by long. I'm old now telling this. I lost my place among the Kethavar. A keeper who turned against the sink was not welcome among the people who'd built it, even after it fell, maybe especially after it fell. But I don't regret it. I spent my life after helping the freed, the beings who'd walked out of the dismantled sink, the ones who'd learned because of Daniel that they weren't finished. It was good work. It was penance, maybe, for the 400 years my people had spent finishing the abandoned. And it was the work Daniel Reyes made possible, by refusing twice, once to be finished and once to be quiet. I saw him again, years later. He'd built a life, an ordinary one, which was what he'd always wanted, the quiet life of a man who'd had enough of being extraordinary. And I asked him the thing I'd wondered since the 8th day, since I watched him walk out of the unbeatable place. How did you know? I asked. In the sink. When it was draining you, taking your will, telling you that you were finished, how did you know it was lying? How did you know you weren't actually finished when everything, the whole place, the whole certainty of 400 years was telling you that you were? And Daniel thought about it, and gave me the answer that I've carried ever since. I didn't know, he said. That's the thing, Keeper, I didn't know I wasn't finished. The sink might have been right, maybe I was finished. Maybe it was hopeless. I couldn't actually tell. It felt hopeless. It felt finished. The place was very good at making it feel that way. He paused. But here's what I figured out in there, the thing that got me through. It doesn't matter whether you're actually finished. You can't know that. Nobody can know that. Not really, not about themselves. The sink wanted me to believe I was finished, because believing it makes it true. You stop, you give up, you sink, and then you really are finished, and the belief made itself real. So the trick, the only trick, was to refuse to believe it even when I couldn't tell if it was true. To act like I wasn't finished whether I was or not. Because if I was finished, then it didn't matter what I did. But if I wasn't, if there was even a chance, then the only thing that could finish me was believing I already was, so I refused to believe it, not because I knew I'd make it, because refusing was the only thing that gave me a chance, and a chance was better than the certainty the sink was selling. He looked at me. That's the whole secret, keeper. That's the thing my people learned on our hard old world, the thing that's the oldest part of us. You don't have to know you'll survive. You just have to refuse to be certain you won't. Because finished isn't a fact, it's a belief. And the one thing that can never finish you is the refusal to believe you're finished. The sink ran on certainty. And the answer to certainty, the only answer, is to refuse it. To keep going when you can't know if going matters. That's not strength, it's just stubbornness. But it turns out stubbornness, the refusal to accept that you're finished, is the one thing the most certain machine in the galaxy could never overcome. Because it can take everything else. It can't take your refusal to agree with it. Only you can give that up. And I wouldn't. People ask me when I tell this story what the lesson is. And for a long time I gave them the obvious one, that hope matters, that you should never give up the usual things. All true, all too small. The real lesson is the one Daniel taught me, the one that unmade 400 years of my civilization's deepest certainty. The Kethavar built the sink because we believed in completion, that some things are finished, that the universe has an end state, that certainty is real, and the kindest thing is to honor it. And we were wrong, in the deepest way a civilization can be wrong. Because finished was never a fact of the universe. It was always a judgment we made, about which beings were worth continuing and which we'd give up on, and then we dressed the judgment up as certainty, as the universe's own verdict, so we wouldn't have to feel the weight of making it. The sink wasn't honoring the universe's completions. It was manufacturing completions and blaming them on the universe. And a human walked into the most perfect version of that lie and refused it. And in refusing it proved that it was a lie, that finished is never certain, never imposed, never the universe's verdict, but only ever a belief, and that the one being who refuses the belief cannot be finished by it. The sink could take his energy, his hope, his will, his self. It could not take his refusal to agree that he was finished. And that refusal, the stubbornest, most ordinary, most human thing, turned out to be the one thing in the galaxy that certainty could not defeat. The Kethavar sink was meant to kill him in a week. It was the most certain killer ever built, 400 years perfect, the universe's own completion made into a machine. And he escaped instead, not because he was stronger than certainty, but because he refused to believe in it, and certainty, it turns out, only works on those who believe. They told him he was finished. He simply declined to agree. And it turned out that was always, all along, the only escape there ever was, and the one thing the most certain place in the galaxy was never built to survive. The most certain killer ever built told him he was finished. He didn't know if it was true, but he refused to believe it, and kept refusing, day after day, until the machine that ran on certainty broke against the one thing it could never take, a human's refusal to agree that he was done.